And this, of course, is a big one. And if looking at the people attending here is anything to go by, then you will understand the importance of the subject matter at hand here. And we spoke to the Deputy Commissioner, and very interestingly, talking about the disruptive nature of digital markets and how the Competition Commission actually has to now find ways, adjust, as it were, to these new challenges that keep popping up all over the show, in addition to what traditionally would have been legislated for in any event. And we're going to talk now to another component in this whole array, which is, of course, the Competition Tribunal. And with me now is Mondo Mazwai, who was recently appointed as the first black female chairperson of the Competition Tribunal. Thanks so much for coming through, and welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you, Sakina.
So, firstly, let's start by just talking about the Competition Tribunal and what the tribunal actually does.
Our job as the tribunal is more like a court. We adjudicate on cases that are brought to us by the Competition Commission or by private parties. We regulate mergers and acquisitions, and we give the approval for companies that want to merge. And we also look at complaints about anti-competitive behavior in the market. And those are the mainstreams of the work that we do. Our job as the tribunal is to interpret the law, to make fair and consistent and predictable decisions so that businesses can be encouraged to invest.
And this, of course, is very challenging. It is very tricky, and I understand there was quite a robust session yesterday that really, got people talking. And before we get into some of those nitty-gritties, let's just talk about your role as the chairperson of the tribunal, and how has that been?
It's been very exciting. I feel honored to have taken over as chair. I feel, particularly as a woman, that I owe it to the women who marched in 1956 and others in history who have paved the way for future generations. It's very exciting. I suspect that those women were overwhelmed at times, but I draw courage from their success.
And what sort of challenges do you expect, as the first black female chairperson of this tribunal? Because considering what you deal with, abuse of dominance by cartels, as you said, you deal with matters such as mergers. Those are very serious matters and often very high stakes. So what sort of challenges are you expecting?
I think one of the challenges is going to come around the new amendments, which introduced new public interest issues, and that is untested territory. And so I think we are going to be getting a lot of pushback in terms of how to interpret the law in those areas. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges.
And speaking of pushback, and I understand from those sessions that took place yesterday, there was quite a bit of unhappiness expressed in certain instances of how the law is applied, interpreted. Can we talk a bit about that, and also how that impacts on your job and the mandate that you have?
Yes. I think the changes that are brought by the Competition Act seek to have social inclusivity and to encourage growth in the markets. We have sectors of our economy that are still characterized by monopolies. And so what the Act seeks to do is to give access to smaller businesses to also participate in the mainstream economy and to encourage monopolies basically to act competitively such that they allow smaller businesses into the market. And that's really what the changes are about.
But how successful is that? Because one would imagine if you do have a monopoly over a certain sector of the economy, you're not necessarily easy going to relinquish that space in the market. So how easy or how difficult is that proving to be?
Well, that is exactly what the challenge is going to be. And when I was talking about pushback earlier, it's exactly going to be about that, because there is also fairness in the process of adjudication. You cannot just break up a monopoly because it is a monopoly. But the new amendments actually also make space for the Competition Commission to run what is called market inquiries, to look at sectors of the economy where there isn't sufficient entry and participation and growth, and to find where the problems lie in those markets. Even if the firms haven't abused their dominance, the Act now allows the Commission to look and see and make recommendations as to how to change those markets, even without a contravention of the Act.
And finally, just in terms of punitive measures, because there has been consistent, objection to some of the punitive measures that have been passed down to people who have been found guilty and companies found guilty of anti-competitive behavior. Do you believe that it is enough at this stage, or should there be more discussion and perhaps change in legislation in this regard once again?
When the amendments do bring about changes, they have increased the penalties that firms should pay when they contravene the Act. Previously, it used to be 10% of their annual turnover, and currently it's been increased to about 20%. Some of the provisions allowed for the firms not to get a fine for the first-time offence, but the amendments now allow for first-time offences to actually receive a penalty.
Well,
so that's been strengthened.
It has been strengthened, and it all, of course, comes down to enforcement and making sure that they actually feel these measures. But thank you so much for stopping by and speaking to us. And that, of course, Mondo Mazwai, who is the chairperson of the Competition Tribunal here in South Africa. And we'll bring you more discussions here from the annual conference of the Competition Commission. It is, of course, a significant milestone for them this year, celebrating 20 years of existence. But for now, it's back to Leanne.